Jey Uso wants no part of Jimmy Uso, Roman Reigns, or the Bloodline saga. At least not yet. That's what we learned on this week's edition of WWE Raw, which was a taped episode from last week, as everyone is on the UK tour currently. So it's a taped episode, and quite frankly, there was not a lot to this episode in terms of huge storyline advancement or anything like that. But again, you did have a couple key things here that we will discuss. And yes, it does kind of start with the interaction between Jimmy Uso and Jey Uso on the show, which was really contained to a couple segments, two very short segments, because, well, Jey had nothing to say. He did not want to entertain Jimmy's request by any means. And each time, Jimmy kind of, basically says, hey, I want to talk to you for a second, Jey wants no part of it and walks off, and that's pretty much it. So this wasn't exactly, again, anything huge, but it was kind of what we expected, right? Because you knew that when Jimmy made it clear on SmackDown last week that, he said, look, there's one person I know that can help us. And I mentioned, hey, look, Jay's the most obvious one, but of course there's still Sami Zayn. There's still Paul Heyman. There's still a couple ways you can go in terms of how you figure out how everyone's going to get back on the same page here. And this was always going to be a challenge. If Jimmy Uso decided to go straight to Jey, the person, that he had been, feuding with up to WrestleMania 40, these two finally had their big blow-off match there and everything. You knew this was going to be a challenge. If Jimmy thought that Jey was just going to say, sure, I'll come help you, that was not going to be the case. And right in this picture right here sort of tells the story. Jey just, again, is not excited about this idea of even listening to Jimmy try to convince him to help, him and Roman Reigns in their fight against Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, and the Tongans. And so that's been the story, though, right? We're going to have to find out what it's going to take for Jey Uso now to get himself back into this Bloodline story. Because as we've talked about for weeks now, it was all about Jey Uso proving that he could finally be a singles champion, finally be someone that's, viewed as a top star without needing Jimmy Uso, without needing Roman Reigns, without needing anything to do with the Bloodline. And now that he's proven that, as I've said, why would he sacrifice everything just to go back to these guys who have wronged him seemingly time and time again and put him in a position where it led to Jey Uso's downfall, right? But now he's fought his way all the way back to the top. He's become Intercontinental Champion. And again, he's done this by himself. He hasn't needed Jimmy. He hasn't needed Roman. And that is the story that they are telling here because it's the one that makes the most sense. You can't just have Jey all of a sudden say, all right, I'll go help him because he's my brother. Well, he is his brother, but he did a lot of things to him to make his life hell. And so now with Jey seemingly feeling like he's on top of the world as Intercontinental Champion, is he really going to sacrifice all that to come back into the Bloodline saga? And that's the story that we're going to have to figure out, how they're going to get him there. And I don't, we knew it wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be as easy, as him just coming back and agreeing to this. But now I think the interest becomes, how does Jey get back into this thing? Because it's going to take more than just Jimmy, trying to get his attention here. Is Roman going to have to be the one who comes over now to have that face-to-face conversation with Jey Uso? Because it wasn't enough for Jimmy. Because again, you think about, and we brought this up, all the different dynamics between all the characters that were in this Bloodline, between Roman, Jimmy, Jey, Sami, even Paul Heyman, and, even Solo to an extent, which now his, storyline is playing out with his version of the Bloodline. But everybody had sort of a different relationship. And so is Roman going to have to come over and be the person who convinces Jey? Are they going to have to finally sort of bury the hatchet here between the two and really, get that frustration out to move past all of, the history that they've had over the past several years? That's something that could certainly be very intriguing. Is it going to take Sami Zayn? Is Jimmy going to realize, I can't get to Jey directly. I've got to go through Sami, who, as we've said, Sami has really nothing to lean on right now. He lost the Intercontinental Championship. He lost his opportunity to become the world champion by beating Gunther. And so now, what does Sami have to do? He doesn't have a whole lot going on. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to be kind of fascinating to see if maybe Jimmy now realizes he has to go through Sami to get to Jey. Or could it just be Jimmy saying, you know what, Tribal Chief, I've come up short trying to get to Jey. Here's who we really need. We need the wise man. We need Paul Heyman. And as we mentioned, Roman Reigns kind of said, hey, I'm not the creative one. I'm not the manipulator. He said that on SmackDown this past week. They need that guy, which is Paul Heyman. And is it Heyman the person who somehow finds a way to put this all together? There's a lot of different ways you can go here, but like we said, we knew Jimmy was going to have to come to Raw. We know that Roman Reigns is going to have to come to Raw at some point. That's just, it's got to happen for them to get everybody somehow together to do this. And I just think there's so many different, kind of ideas that they have to work with now. And again, it was not going to be a fast process because you still have we're a month and a half away from Survivor Series. And as we've seen, it's not just, you're doing it once a week on Raw or on SmackDown. We now see that everyone's pretty much going to interact on Raw and SmackDown because you're going to have this story play out on both brands because, well, you need the two Raw guys and Jey and Sami to put this all together, which means you have to bring the two SmackDown guys, Roman and Jimmy, which, by the way, keep in mind, too, we're calling Roman and Jimmy SmackDown guys, but if you remember with the draft and all that, I want to say, wasn't there, officially some kind of free agency or something like that they played into the draft? Paul Heyman mentioned that, I think. So maybe I'm wrong on that, but I seem to remember, of course, that was like forever ago with the draft. But so again, you have these opportunities to play this storyline out on Raw and on SmackDown every week. It's not just one brand. And as we've talked about, again, I think you have anybody jump between whatever brand they want to jump from. I'm fine with that. I don't have an issue with not doing the hard brand split the way, maybe some do. But for something like this, I think it's worth it to do whatever you can to make it the most interesting storyline. And I think they're doing that right now. So we now wait for the next chapter. What's Jimmy going to, he's going to have to go back to Roman and he's going to have to tell him, look, Jey was not having it. I could not convince Jey to listen. And so maybe the tribal chief thinks he's got to be the one to do this, and it's going to be kind of fun to see how all of these guys interact with each other leading up to this match. We know they're going to get there. We just don't know how they're going to do it. And so, yeah, I thought that was certainly the most significant thing that happened on this week's edition of Raw, even though it was contained to two segments that were very short, but at least you started to see the wheels put in motion here for trying to get Jey back into the Bloodline picture. So elsewhere on Raw, you had Cody and Gunther have a pretty uneventful exchange in the ring, I guess, is the best way to put it. And again, keep in mind, like I said, it's a tape show. We've seen this with tape shows in the past. They're not going to necessarily bring out all the biggest stuff on shows that are taped because I wouldn't say a lot of people, but maybe there's a decent, amount of people, I guess, who probably already read the spoilers, already know what happened. You kind of know that going in. And so just something to consider. And again, Cody and Gunther didn't say a whole lot to each other here. It was really just, each guy sort of explaining themselves to the other in terms of, where they're at. And, Cody kind of calling out Gunther in terms of how he's, been someone that you've seen sort of break under the pressure and that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, Gunther's kind of calling Cody a secondary champion and those kind of things. And so a pretty, sort of, again, uneventful. I don't know how else to put it. It was not a huge exchange between these two. But again, you still have a little ways to get there before we get to Crown Jewel in several weeks. So Gunther did bring up sort of Cody and his emotional mess, as he called it, with Kevin Owens and bringing up the Cody friendship thing that has been such a big theme here recently. We see what happens when you're a friend of Cody Rhodes. And so, that was kind of it between Gunther and Cody. Match should be great, but like we said, this is one of those that does feel kind of forced just because you have to do it given the stakes of the Crown Jewel title and all that. But I'm sure they'll make it work in terms of once we actually get there. It's just the story to that point, could be a little bit back and forth because Cody's got he's got the Kevin Owens and Randy Orton thing to worry about. And so, yeah, he's kind of split in multiple directions here on that. The main event was Rhea Ripley and Tiffany Stratton teaming up to take on Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. That ends in the DQ as it was Nia Jax getting involved. And then after the match, you had Nia destroy Liv, which, of course, you're thinking, all right, now's Tiffany's chance to cash in. And just as Tiffany goes to do that, Dominic pulls Liv out of harm's way. And so she's not able to cash in, but not really anything of note there either. It was Tiffany kind of obeying Nia's orders to go get the briefcase, to get ready to cash in. But, Nia can always say, well, you're a little too slow and those kind of things to actually cash in. That allowed Dominic to get in there, save Liv, all that kind of stuff. But, I think that's kind of what you expected. You knew Nia would be involved in this somehow. And like I mentioned, I teased it last week. I talked about kind of seeing the spoilers for this show. And I said, I'm very intrigued as to where they go now with Tiffany Stratton, because we know she's going to eventually cash in. And once she does cash in, I think she is going to be someone who's, likely a babyface at that point, especially if she cashes in on Nia, because I just think that, again, people want to see this. We remember we talked about it, months and months ago. Go back to Elimination Chamber, and you see kind of the reactions she's getting in Australia. And Tiffany Stratton has just kind of built from there, and now they've kind of, introduced that dynamic where she becomes the Money in the Bank holder, Nia becomes the champion, these two are friends, and then you kind of play off of that each week, and that's what they've been doing. And so, I still think that's how you do it. Tiffany's cashing in on Nia, to me, is the thing that probably still makes the most sense, and I think you get your biggest payoff on that. But, could it happen at Crown Jewel? Certainly possible. Could it happen beyond that? And we've talked about other potential matches for Tiffany down the road. Certainly a Charlotte Flair match, I think, at a WrestleMania 41 could certainly be a huge profile match if they decided to go that direction. And there are a lot of opponents still out there but we're still waiting on the cash in, and we see how it plays out. But for now, we know it's Nia versus Liv for the other Crown Jewel title this year. So, yeah, we're kind of moving ahead on that. And then speaking of Rhea, again, Rhea's made it clear that she's also not done with this, right? She wants to get that championship back. She's got unfinished business with Raquel. You would got to think they're going to do that singles match at some point too. And so that was kind of, where we kind of left off on this week's Raw with those parties involved there. And speaking of Rhea, tied to Damian Priest, and they did sort of tease the thing backstage where, and I'd mentioned this before. I'm like, look, Priest beating Balor, I could mention all the reasons why Finn Balor needed that win more than Damian Priest, but I said the actual thing to think about is Priest needs that win to move on, so he can move away from the Judgment Day stuff, get back into the championship picture, because remember, not that long ago, this guy's the world champion, and so I think you need to get him back into that conversation, and to do that, he kind of has to get away from Judgment Day, and that's something that Rhea, sort of teased here, was her telling him to get back into the championship picture. He's done with Judgment Day. Of course, he said as long as Rhea's involved with him, he's, still a part of this, but I think that is very smart. Get Damian Priest away from the Judgment Day for now, and let him now move on to something else, which you can kind of tell the way we've seen him over the past couple of weeks. To me, it does sound like they're sort of just holding off on him to get back into something, maybe with a rematch with Gunther, perhaps, at some point after Crown Jewel. Could be something that you could do there. So, yeah, I think that's definitely something that's in the works, and I think, again, it is smart to have Priest going back for the championship, because he hasn't really had his opportunity to get it back. I don't think he'll get it back, but I think at least, for his motivation, it makes sense for him to get back into that picture. Again, those to me were the biggest things on this show. I mean, you did have, the stuff with Braun Breaker and Kofi Kingston. Of course, Jey made the save there, but, Breaker and Jey, we know that's going to happen now. That match is set. It is going to be the rematch, Braun Breaker versus Jey Uso. And so, you kind of had Breaker having the involvement with the New Day here, and Kofi and Xavier Woods. You can still tell Xavier Woods is not thrilled with what's going on here, especially after Jey sort of makes the save. So we're just waiting for that point, with the New Day, and they've been building it up. But yeah, we've kind of had that. We tag team partners right now, not exactly getting along, right? Miz and R-Truth. You had the Miz sort of snap on Truth here. They had the one-on-one match, which I guess you'd call it a match. Truth rolls him up in about 30 seconds after the Final Testament walks down. You had the sort of Wyatt 6 symbol on the screen, so we know we're getting something there with that. Could you have maybe the Wyatt 6 getting involved here with either the Final Testament or the Miz? I mean, that seems to be what they're hinting at. But yeah, tag team partners, friends, like all the friends and tag partners right now are just really having some struggles in terms of their consistency with their relationships, because we see a lot of that going on in WWE right now. So, yeah, but I mean, elsewhere, honestly, guys, I mean, I didn't, they kind of teased the stuff with Seth Rollins and Bronson Reed. We know we're getting that match at some point. It's just a matter of when that's made official. Adam Pearce, I thought it was good of him to, sort of kind of tease the fact that he's not sure if he wants to make this match for Seth Rollins' sake, because Rollins does have the injury history. We've seen what Bronson Reed has done to people, and so I think that's kind of how they're setting this one up, but we know we're going to get the singles match. And I don't know, to me that sounds like a Crown Jewel match. Could be wrong about that, but I think that's one you could certainly do. Feels like a big match. Get Rollins back in the, kind of rotation here, and I think that feels like a big match for Crown Jewel. in my opinion. But we'll find out. We did have the Women's Championship match kicking things off. And again, if you had read the spoilers, you probably already knew what was going to happen. And we kind of figured that it was going to be the champs retaining. But I think it's interesting how the champs did retain, right? Because you had Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson ringside, and they played a factor in the finish here where, basically you had Lash Legend, punching Io Sky, and then Belair capitalizes with the KOD to allow them to retain the championships. Now, they kind of push it as though, well, Belair didn't see what happened, but I think this is actually something where you can eventually play into a Bianca Belair heel turn down the line as to say, well, she didn't see what happened here, but she took advantage of it basically with heels helping her here, right? Jakara Jackson, Lash Legend are the heels in this, discussion, and so they're the ones who kind of help her inadvertently, I guess you could say, but I think that's something that can play in down the line too. But so at least I said, I think it's good to have the NXT talents getting some visibility on the main brand whenever you can, and we saw those two in action, against Belair and Cargill on SmackDown. Now they're here, kind of playing that into it. So clearly they're going to have something going on too with Damage Control moving forward, whether they do that on NXT or they do that on Raw. That's something else you can do. So, yeah, that was really it. The War Raiders returned. They beat Alpha Academy, so the Viking Raiders are back. Eric and Ivar, they get the win. And I always thought they were a team that it was just really the usage. How you use them is very important because, they are two big badasses. And so if you use them that way, they can definitely, be a team that I think gets, a lot of positive responses and just kind of use their strength and power and all that, and they win to advance in this number one contenders tournament for the Tag Team Championship. So we are going to get Finn Balor and JD McDonough eventually defending those titles. They haven't done it a whole lot, but they're going to have to defend it against whoever wins this championship or whoever wins this tournament. We know that's kind of something that's in motion too. So, honestly, guys, that was it. Not a lot. I think to this episode in terms of like, hey, it was must see or anything like that. I just don't think it was. I think it was a tape show, and it was a tape show for a reason. And sometimes you get some stuff that's more notable than others, but it really was kind of limited to. I thought, the Jey Jimmy stuff, the main event, Cody Gunther, even that was not really, I think, not something that it's going to stand out just yet, but they'll get there. This was just sort of the beginning of having these two interact and all that, just to kind of set the stage for this being their first big one-on-one encounter and all that. So we'll get more between those two. We know that's coming. But yeah, everything else, that was Raw. And it also did a hype video here for Dragon Lee, which I thought was interesting to kind of see if they sort of heat up Dragon Lee a little bit moving forward, kind of, make him somebody that sort of separates himself just from the LWO and can become, kind of a weekly attraction on Raw because he's so talented. And so we'll see what happens with that. Chad Gable also, forgot to mention that video package they did. American made. Chad Gable and the Creed brothers and Ivy Nile are here to save America. They are the heroes. And so it is what it is with Chad Gable and company right now. So we'll see what they do to be the heroes for everyone. So there you go, guys. That was Raw. Let me know what you thought about this week's episode and where you think things head from here with the Bloodline stuff between Jey and Jimmy, Cody and Gunther. What do you want to see between them leading up to their big match? Tiffany Stratton, what's going to happen with her? Does she cash in at Crown Jewel? All this stuff. Let me know your thoughts moving forward here on all the big storylines. And appreciate you watching as always. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out as well. And let me know your thoughts on this week's edition of WWE Raw.